Every 9 years, a ship sailed from Athens to Crete with black sails. On board were 14 of the most beautiful young men and women in the city. They were not warriors, they were not criminals, they were tribute, a payment. And when the ship reached Crete, they were marched into a labyrinth so vast and so twisted that no mind could map it. At the center of that labyrinth waited a creature, half man and half bull, a minotaur. None of them ever came out. For decades, Athens bled its children into the dark, until one prince stepped onto that ship and swore he would be the last. This is the story of Theseus. Long before Theseus was born, his mortal father, Aegeus, the king of Athens, traveled in despair to the city of Troezen. He had no heir, no son to inherit his throne, and the oracle had given him a riddle he could not solve. In Troezen, he was welcomed by King Pythias, who understood the riddle perfectly. That night, Pythias sent his daughter Aethra to the king's bed. And on that same night, the goddess Aphrodite whispered to her in a dream and led her down to the shore. There, in the dark waves, the god Poseidon himself came to her. When the morning came, Aethra was carrying a child who was both the son of a mortal king and the son of the god of the sea. Before Aegeus left Troezen, he buried his sword and his sandals beneath an enormous boulder. He told Aethra, "If the child grows strong enough to lift this stone, send him to Athens. He will be my heir." Then he sailed home and waited. The boy Aethra raised was Theseus. He grew taller and stronger than any child of Troezen. By the time he was 25, he walked to the boulder, set his shoulder against it, and lifted it as easily as a stone from a riverbed. Beneath it lay his father's sword and his father's sandals. His mother begged him to sail to Athens by sea. The road was infested with bandits and monsters. But Theseus refused. He wanted Aegeus to know he was the son he had asked for. So he walked. On the road, he faced 6 killers, a giant who pinned travelers to a bed and broke them to fit it, a bandit who tied victims to pine trees and tore them in half, a cliff dweller who pushed travelers into the sea to be devoured by a giant turtle, a wrestler who challenged every traveler and never lost, a club-wielding monster guarding a mountain pass, and a brutal toll-keeper of the road. Theseus defeated every one of them. By the time he reached Athens, his name was already a song. But Athens was not safe. King Aegeus had taken a wife, the sorceress Medea, and she had borne him a son. Medea wanted the throne for her child. When Theseus arrived at the palace, she recognized him before Aegeus did, and she whispered to the old king that the young stranger was a threat sent to murder him. Aegeus, paranoid and aging, agreed to a feast. A cup of wine, laced with poison, was placed in front of Theseus. Theseus drew his father's sword to cut his meat. The hilt caught the torchlight, and Aegeus saw the blade he had buried under a stone 20 years earlier. He recognized it. He cried out and struck the cup from the table. The poison spilled across the marble floor. Medea was banished from Athens that night, and for the first time in his life, Aegeus held his son. The reunion lasted only a few months, because the ship from Crete was already sailing. Years before, Athens had killed a son of King Minos of Crete. As punishment, Minos had crushed the city in war and demanded a price. Every 9 years, Athens would send 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete. They would not return. The reason was not war. The reason was a creature. Minos' wife, Pasiphae, had been cursed by Poseidon and had given birth to a monster, a child with the body of a man and the head of a bull. The Minotaur. Minos could not destroy him because he was royal blood. He could not let him roam because he was a beast. So Minos commanded the master craftsman Daedalus to build a prison so complex that nothing inside could ever find its way out. The labyrinth. The Athenian tribute was the food. When the ship came for the third time, Theseus walked to his father and told him, "I will go. I will go in their place, and when I return, I will raise white sails on the ship, so you will know from the cliffs that I am alive." Aegeus tried to stop him. Theseus would not listen. The ship sailed for Crete with black sails, 14 tributes on board, and a prince among them. When the ship landed at Crete, Minos came to inspect the tributes. He stood on the dock in his crimson and black robes, his bull-horned crown catching the sun, and he looked at each of them in turn. But behind him stood his daughter, Ariadne. She was 18 years old, and the moment her eyes met those of the young prince standing among the tributes, the goddess Aphrodite reached down and struck her heart. Ariadne fell in love with Theseus in a single breath. That night, she crept into the chamber where the tributes were held. She brought with her 2 things: a bronze sword her father did not know she had taken, and a single ball of fine red thread. She whispered to him, "Tie one end of this thread to the door of the labyrinth. Carry the rest with you as you walk, and when you have done what you came to do, follow the thread back. It is the only way out." She told him, "If you survive, take me with you. I cannot stay in this house." Theseus swore that he would. At dawn, the tributes were marched to the labyrinth gates. The walls were so high that the sun did not reach the floor. The corridors twisted in every direction. The air smelled of old blood. Theseus stepped inside first. He tied the end of Ariadne's red thread to the doorway, and as the gate closed behind them, he began to walk. The other tributes followed. He told them to wait near the entrance. He told them to be silent. He told them not to follow him into the dark. Then he walked alone. Hour after hour he walked, past walls scratched with the names of those who had come before, past bones picked clean, past doorways that opened onto more doorways. The thread unspooled behind him in a thin red line. And then he heard it, a sound deeper than any animal he had ever known, the breathing of something massive. He turned a corner, and at the center of the labyrinth, in a chamber lit by a single shaft of gray light from far above, stood the Minotaur. It was twice the size of a man. Its horns were stained dark from 100 kills. Its eyes were red and full of rage. It saw Theseus, and it charged. Theseus stepped to the side. They circled each other in the dust. What happened next was not a battle of strength. It was a battle of will. And when it was over, the Minotaur lay still on the floor of the labyrinth, and Theseus stood over it, breathing hard. He picked up the red thread, and he began to follow it back. By the time Theseus emerged from the labyrinth, the other tributes had wept themselves to silence. When they saw him alive, blood on his arms, the thread in his hand, they could not believe it. That night, Ariadne came to him. They gathered the tributes. They ran for the harbor. They cut the ropes of the Athenian ship and pushed it into the sea before any Cretan guard could stop them. The ship sailed for Athens. Theseus had done what no man before him had done. He had walked into the labyrinth, and he had walked out. But on the way home, the ship stopped at the island of Naxos to take on water. What happened on Naxos has been told in many ways. Some said Ariadne fell ill. Some said the gods commanded Theseus to leave her. Some said he simply forgot her. What is agreed is this. When the ship sailed from Naxos at dawn, Ariadne was still asleep on the shore, and Theseus was on the deck, and he did not turn back. She woke alone on an empty island, watching the sails of the ship that had carried her lover disappear over the horizon. But she was not alone for long. because the god Dionysus walked out of the trees behind her. He had seen everything. He took her hand, and he made her his bride, and he placed a crown of stars in the sky in her honor. The crown is still there. The ship sailed on toward Athens, and in the rush, in the grief, in the storm of everything that had happened, Theseus forgot one promise, the most important one. He forgot to change the sails. The ship returned to Athens with the same black sails it had left under. On the cliffs above the harbor, an old king had been watching the horizon for weeks. Day after day, he had stood at the edge of the cliff, looking south, waiting for the white sails that would tell him his son was alive. He saw the ship. He saw the black sails. And in his grief, King Aegeus stepped off the cliff and fell into the sea below. The water has been called the Aegean ever since, named for the king who threw himself into it because he believed his son was dead. Theseus reached the harbor an hour later. They told him what his father had done. He had walked into the deepest dark in the world. He had killed a creature no man could kill. He had outsmarted the king of Crete, and the only thing he could not do was remember to change a sail. He became king of Athens that day, the most famous hero in his city's history. But for the rest of his life, when he stood on the cliffs above the harbor and looked out at the sea named for his father, he understood something the labyrinth had never taught him.